subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Mr. Thiaga, Rajan, who is the Finance Minister of Tamil Nadu. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. Sir, my first question to you is that the budget for the state is soon to come out. So, what can we expect? You've said in earlier interviews this is an amended budget. What is the main focus of the budget? Because we're coming off a second COVID wave here.
I think normally amended budgets will reflect the changed priorities when they come with a new regime, right? Normally, interim budget happens before an election, and then the amended budget clearly should at least have that distinction of what is the policy change that led to a change in regime. In this case, we have even greater problem, which is that the second wave of COVID was many times the size of the first. And in addition, we are coming after 10 years, normally every 5 years, as you know, for the last 30, 40 years. And I would say the third big complication is that the state of finances are really, really bad. I think many have commented on it, the 15th Finance Commission, the RBI, the CAG. So we had to overcome a lot of different things. So I think this time you'll see significant change in the numbers because we had no choice. But more than that, a significant change in the approach, in the philosophy, in the execution, in the administration. I think you should expect to see all that as a sea change compared to what was presented back in February.
When you're talking about approach, can we get into specifics of anything which will change specifically vis-a-vis approach?
Look, we had a cabinet meeting earlier today. And in the course of that, of course, it's confidential, so I can't reveal too much. But one of the points that was very clear, which I made in response to some discussion, all outcomes have to be attributed to the political leadership. We are a democracy. We are not a run by IAS country. We are run by elected officials. That's the nature of our constitution. So when the outcomes are good, then the political leadership must be credited. When the outcomes are bad, then the political leadership must take the cost of that. So I think you will find that a completely different approach in terms of the previous leadership almost was at sea, in my opinion. It's not the first time I'm expressing this. And we are going to be very hands-on. We are going to get back to the mechanics of administration. How are we supposed to actually run a government? What are our philosophies? How are we going to put them in practice? What measures and tools and systems do we need to efficiently administer such a large state with such a big economy? And, we are releasing the white paper in the next few days that shows the true state of affairs. When we were in opposition, I was one of the leading voices that said that we are not getting a good idea of what is the true state of affairs. Partly because many years worth of CAG reports were not released. Right? They just released, for example, or rather I released after I became finance minister and signed, the 17-18 CAG report. So many years worth of CAG reports were not released. And a lot of funny money accounting was being done. It was obvious that the numbers didn't add up. Like the total fiscal deficit and the total increase in public debt was starting to vary by 20, 30,000 crores. It's one thing when they vary by 1,000 or 2,000 crores. That's just accounting and timing and all that. So those things needed to be cleared up. So we had asked for that. And now that we are in government, we are going to do what we asked for when we were in opposition. So first we are going to issue the white paper. And then we are going to change the approach to management of the economy.
You've said in the past that before the budget, the white paper will be released. Why is it so important for the white paper to be out? You mentioned right now, but what exactly will the white paper entail and how will it help the people of Tamil Nadu?
Well, as a citizen and as an opposition MLA, I often felt that the lack of transparency of the government's functioning was really the kind of beginning of a whole host of problems, right? Again, different people have different philosophies. All this comes from the top. The Chief Minister has said very clearly, our Chief Minister has said that we want a transparent government. We want to work along with the people. We want to keep them informed and get them involved in the government. And so that level of transparency, I think, is a fundamental tenet of democracy, at least for my Chief Minister, for my former Chief Minister, Kalingar, for all of these people, which the government that just finished 3 months ago did not seem to think very much of that. Now, at the time, I thought it was willful kind of obstruction, and there was some of that. I mentioned in my assembly speech during the governor's address, or rather, in response to a comment by the former chief minister remarks, I gave an explanation, and I said the file with the CAG's report was returned without stating reason multiple times. I mean, what else is that but suppression? The report, the procedure is the file comes from the CAG, the finance minister forwards it to the chief minister's office, he agrees, place it on the table, it goes to the governor and comes back and gets placed on the table of the house. Placing on the table of the house makes it public. Till then, it's a confidential document. So that file had been sent back from the chief minister's office to the finance minister's office multiple times over months and months, with no explanation or no reason stated. File may be returned to finance minister. File may be returned to finance minister. So what we have said from the beginning is that this lack of transparency is lulling people into a kind of both a false sense of fear. What is the real problem? Because people are not that uninformed in general, and the lack of official information leads to all kinds of other kinds of perceptions, right? So I think the basis for a shared understanding, what is the reality? How much does the government owe? What is the interest cost? What is it per head? What are the total operating costs on things like the electricity department and the transport department? How much correction is needed? I think is a good starting point, because we have to take the people along. Reform is not always easy. The people have to support us, and we need to tell them what the true state of affairs is.
You spoke that this is the amended budget, what you said, which is coming out. In February, you said the main budget will come where you can actually make key changes. Is that something you have in mind already, or something you're working towards, which you can tell us about, key steps you'll be making then, which can really change the state of the economy?
Well, look, I think you need to stop and think a lot about what does the budget do. I'll give you an example. If you take the union government over the last 6 or 7 years, what have been some of the major policy decisions or changes the government has taken that have changed the outcome of the economy or the finances of the people of India? Demonetization, the GST, the lockdown, the corporate tax rollback, the alleged aid packages, which turned out to be very much smaller. None of these found any place in the budget. Right? So what really is a budget statement for? Of course, at some level it is an information transmission. It says what is the state of affairs. But if really it states the philosophy of your economic policies for the next year, what is it, why are you going to do, and what are you going to do? If that is the basis, I would say the budgets of the last 5-6 years of the union government have been kind of almost irrelevant, right? What they say in the budget to what the main decisions they make that affect people's lives and the economy have been divorced from each other. We don't want to be like that. We want to use the budget to really kind of weave the economic philosophy, our political values, and actionable steps all together. And in that sense, our principle is exactly what most successful states and countries follow, which is that if you do things right, then the growth comes. If you try to be an equitable society, then you really have a harmonious kind of community. So these are the things that I think people should look for in a budget. For me to announce a plus 100 crore scheme or a plus 50 crore or a change of this or that, most of the taxation power was already written into the hands of the union government during independence and the constitution. What little indirect taxation power was with the states, the bulk of that has already been taken over through GST. And so the state governments have very little kind of flexibility, relatively speaking, relative to any other state government in China or in America or any kind of large democracy. The state governments have limited revenue generating or revenue management tools at their disposal. Similarly, from an expense standpoint, most of the time inertia dictates the outcomes. So I will just tell you, it's way ahead of my time, and of course the chief minister decides the big approach. I just kind of come up with the package. In that sense, I would say what you should expect to see is a fundamentally different approach to the nature of what is a budget for, what are we going to talk about. Does the finance minister really have to announce 2 crore and 5 crore and 10 crore schemes? It makes no sense to me, right? Unless they are seminal schemes that are changing the nature of your economy or the nature of your workforce. In a budget that is going to be 3 lakh crore plus, all things considered, voted plus charged, it makes no sense for a finance minister to talk about 2 lakh, 5 lakh, 10 lakh. That's what the demands for grants are for. That's what the department ministers are for. If it is incidental to some philosophical change in execution or my approach to the economy, then it's worth it. But otherwise, it's not. So I think that you should expect to be the big difference between the budgets of the last 5 years and the budgets, not just of the amended budget, but even the new budget. We are going to start, relatively speaking, from scratch. And what does scratch means for us? It means from our principles, from our political values, from our manifesto commitments that we made to the people. And then we go from there and say, how are we working towards that during this year? And that's what the budget will be.
So another thing which is also in the news and which many people have been speaking about is the Economic Advisory Council of Tamil Nadu, which has many noted personalities. In the first meeting, CM Stalin said that one of the focuses should be a higher per capita income growth, inclusive economic growth, as well as more employment opportunities. How is the EAC going to work towards it, if you can tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think, the goals stated by the Chief Minister were, I would say about 2/3 of them were fairly universal. Everybody wants higher growth, everybody wants higher per capita income. About 1/3 of them were very unique to this Chief Minister and our movement, the Dravidian movement, which is that he wanted no one left behind. He wanted inclusion to be taken to its ultimate step of no physical location, not just no community, but no physical location, no district should be left behind. And that we want only the right kind of growth. We want growth that takes everybody along, not the kind of growth that separates the billionaires from the poor and the weak. So that, I think, was unique to his philosophy. But that's reflected in the makeup of our council. These people espouse those values in addition to being brilliant in their respective fields. But one thing we wanted to be very clear about is to not make this kind of a very formal arrangement. For example, Professor Duflo was already on the advisory council for President Obama in the United States. And some of her experiences had been that when you have such a large committee and the committee itself spends a lot of time negotiating and bargaining and kind of trying to shape recommendations, that it is an inefficient use of people's time. So we must give the credit to her. So based on her experiences, she came forward with some suggestions about an informal way of working, where both in response to requests that the Chief Minister or I may make, which surely we make them during budgets, during white papers, etc., or if they feel something is important, they can, suo motu, reach out to us. And that we can work together, sometimes all 5, sometimes some subset, sometimes individually, whoever it is. And so far, I would say that has been a very fruitful arrangement for us, right from COVID response. Some special inputs they gave us on focus on seniors and mental health and kind of mapping for a third wave and things like that, the risk assessment that we have taken. So
that is something which came from the EAC mapping?
Yeah, I mean, a particular project which we did in Madurai, which is a pilot project that came from inputs from the EAC, which is to do an overlaid map of antibody penetration, antibody survey, plus vaccine penetration, plus kind of vulnerable population demographic mapping, and see where your highest risks are and kind of take countermeasures in terms of accelerating vaccination or reallocation of vaccines or additional steps. So it's for that example, when we took up that project, we realized that the states don't have 100% of the data for the vaccination, right? You know that or you don't know that? I know. Yeah, even I didn't know that. Co-Win portal is the union government portal. So only the union government has the Aadhaar number or some other unique identifying number of every person who takes a vaccine. So they can do a granular map, for example, because the Aadhaar number is linked to your address and other things. The union government can lay out a map that says, in my city, by ward or by street, what percentage is the vaccination. Surely that is important information for the state to have, but we don't have access.
That's not being shared with the state.
We don't have. So after we started making some noise, and after I asked the collector of Madurai and so forth to write some requests, now Coven started to put out some aggregate statistics. They'll tell you by district, or maybe even they'll tell you by city. I don't think so yet. But what we need is granular. We need by block, by village. Only then this whole exercise works, right? So after we realize that, now we take parallel record keeping. We put it into Coven, but we also started a separate database to maintain this information. But that's one example. Now, inevitably I would say about once a week I get to spend an hour with either one or two of the advisors on calls, and we regularly exchange emails. And I would say that their insights have been invaluable. Right?
It's something like inclusive economic growth, which you said is very intrinsic to the Dravidian movement and to the history of Tamil Nadu. Something like that, if you could tell us like certain steps which members of the EAC are working on, or certain measures, such like policy decisions which have been made towards.
Look, again, I don't want to give the wrong impression, right? The EAC members are brilliant in their own fields. They are passionate about progress, and they are compassionate human beings. But at the end of the day, they have day jobs also, right? They are professors or directors or other activities of their own. Plus, they are volunteers, right? We are not even paying them. They're doing it out of the goodness of their heart and passion for the state of Tamil Nadu and its people. So from that perspective, I don't think you can attribute 100% of any initiative directly to them. We are the political kind of representatives. The people elected us and sent us. The Chief Minister dictates the policy or the strategy, and a person like me takes the responsibility for execution, what the Chief Minister kind of envisions. What the ESC does for us is they are a guiding force to go slightly left, go slightly right, or why don't you try this initiative in addition, or why don't you try this instead, or in my experience this thing works better than this.
How often does the EAC convene?
I just told you, right? It's not a question of convening or not, right? They convene very rarely. That was the original setup. They are all full time doing other things.
One odd.
Yeah, so one or two a week. At least I personally speak to one or two a week for an hour or hour and a half each. And in this day and age, anyway, even for most of us in the same town, we have gotten used to Zoom communication. So, since 4 of the 5 don't live in Chennai and 3 of the 5 don't live in India, we have no other choice but to make it over a video communication. But the value they give us is that they have been there and done that before. So we are the politicians. We have to make the policy decisions. We have to be accountable if they succeed or fail. And we have to answer to the people, right? So what the EAC does for us is it heightens our efficiency, our effectiveness. It reduces our error rate. It prevents us from going down the wrong path in some places. And that's what anybody can ever hope for, right, from an advisory council. If we are successful, I would say it's because we get the inputs of people like them. If we don't succeed, it's not their fault, it's because we can't execute what we set out to execute, right?
You spoke about the Dravidian movement, and you come from a rich legacy of it yourself. And what many people also don't know is that you're someone who was heading the DMK IT cell, which you had said earlier. One of the main aims was to espouse and to get the Dravidian ideology out to the people. How has, as after you've become finance minister and the government has come to power, what is now the aim of the DMK IT cell? Because when we're talking about IT cell, the other IT cell which everyone knows or which is familiar is the BJP IT cell. So how is the DMK IT cell different from one like a national party like the BJP?
First of all, I want to make a distinction that it's not an IT cell, it's an IT wing. There's a distinction.
And how important is that distinction?
Exactly. An IT cell is something that is arranged largely remote, largely faceless, many cases nameless, to penetrate or infiltrate social media and electronic communications and spread propaganda. My leader, who is now the Chief Minister, my party leader, was very clear when we set this up. He said, I want it to be an IT wing. I actually didn't want to do IT cell. My ambition was not to go and do social media. My ambition was not to do IT wing. My ambition was to use data to improve the functioning of the party. So I said, please call it IT office of the headquarters or IT department of the party. Let us first build our infrastructure, which is woefully inadequate. Because once you call it wing, now it requires thousands of people to be involved, and it requires a lot of work to go and select and find all these people and bring them in. The leader was very clear. He said, I want it to be IT wing. Once it became IT wing, the focus changed completely. So the first thing I did after taking 3 months to write up the master plan was to get on the road. And I toured all parts of Tamil Nadu, several thousand kilometers, and several cities and locations, maybe 60, 70 places. We ran interviews. I personally interviewed maybe a few thousand people. We took many more thousand applications and filtered to bring these people. And we tried to bring in people who either had a Dravidian legacy or great interest in the Dravidian philosophy, plus technical skills, plus connectivity on the ground. We were not just looking for, if all you're going to do is penetrate social media, why do I need to go around the state? I can do it sitting in Chennai, right? Big firms have bots, or I can contract it out. So our ambition was to integrate technology into the functioning of the party at all levels of the party, all the way from the wards, from the villages, from the booths, all the way to the head. So I think we are the only party, at least at that time, in the first 2 years or 3 years of our existence, we announced about 20,000 odd office bearers. By org structure, meaning by every booth, every village, so forth, all the way.
Which would not be possible if it was an IT cell, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and which would not be necessary. Why? For possible is something else different. Why necessary? If all I need is to have 50,000 people who will run tweets or likes for me, I don't need to go around the state to do that. I can do it in one place, right? So it was the what can I say? Digital connectivity of the party that we created turned out to be prophetic, because when the COVID pandemic came, it was this infrastructure that helped us to be at least the first party in India and one of the 2 or 3 biggest political conventions anywhere in the world that we did by Zoom. The one that elected the historic general body meeting of the party. Election Commission required general body meeting of the party to elect the new treasurer and new general secretary, only the 4th or 5th in the history of the party. That happened by Zoom. And the reason we could make it happen was because we had already built this infrastructure 2-3 years ago. So we got the kind of profile that had been reluctant to come to the DMK, to be very honest. We got the technical, educated, old Dravidian blood, but cannot really see themselves.
So you're saying there was a bit of resistance at first?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying the other way around. I'm saying people who thought they had no role in contemporary politics.
You managed to get them in the party?
We brought them in because we said we are professionalizing, we are digitalizing, we are connecting, we are making it more transparent, more organized, more technical, and therefore people like you can come. That we did in a big way that I think in fact changed the culture of the party noticeably, even before COVID. And after COVID, the value is immeasurably higher. And with every election in 19 and 21 after the formation of the IT wing, the value of the IT wing in poll management, not just in advertising, but in actually polling day management, Form 17 collection and validation,
you had booth people,
booth management, attendance records. So in my constituency, for example, I know who all came to vote and who all didn't, and I can compare who came this election to that last election and next election. I can predict who's likely to come. This kind of intelligence we certainly didn't have before there was an IT wing. So, the role has kind of expanded greatly.
What do you think, as someone who has set up the DMK IT wing and also then essentially started the digital infrastructure from ground up, what do you think of the BJP IT cell?
Look, I think the BJP was so far ahead of most parties. I'm not just talking about IT cell and all that. I'm just talking about fundamental data-based and technology platform-based party. The BJP was far ahead of us. I'm saying in like, the DMK IT was formed in 2017. The BJP was already having databases of officers and connectivity in 2005, 6, 7 and booth data. So, the BJP in many ways has invested in infrastructure and in all of this much better than us. But I'll tell you two, three other ways to look at this. The first way to look at this is that the BJP IT ecosystem, I wouldn't call it cell, I wouldn't call it wing, they operate in a different level altogether because they spend about 100 times the money that any other party spends. And they do it as a integrated component of their propaganda machine. They are not doing it like we do it to propagate values, to do technical work like connectivity and booth management. They are not interested in all that.
What do they?
RSS does all that. They want to influence social media outcomes and they want to create this fake narrative, that protects, you've seen what happens, right? They twist everything. So the question is, that used to be hugely successful at one time. Why is it not now? I mean, I don't know if you've been keeping up with the trends, but I would say in the last 18 months or 12 months, the like-dislike ratio that they're even able to get on the Prime Minister's page is not in their favor. Like the system has caught up. There was a time when they were in great advantage, where they could bring out 10x to what anybody else could bring out. Now, I don't know what all variables go into it. I can tell you what the outcome is. The outcome is they don't dominate social media anymore.
They were at one point.
At a national level, which they did. Then you take it to the third level, and I'll give you two more ways of looking at this. Why is it that they cannot penetrate in Tamil Nadu? In Tamil Nadu, we have the highest level of average education of any large state. We have the highest penetration of internet of any large state.
So right now we're in session of Parliament, and just before Parliament, the Pegasus story did break, where many people are on the target list. Many opposition leaders have come for a united opposition to then discuss the Pegasus issue. Right now, Kanmuri ma'am has also met Ms. Mamata Banerjee regarding this issue. Do you think a court-monitored probe is required, and how grave do you think is this entire Pegasus story?
I think in any democracy, if a government acts without accountability and doesn't either agree or deny what it has done, it's not a good sign for democracy. But in terms of more specific comments than that, I don't think I'm the right guy for it, because I'm only a state elected representative, and of course I have a view as a citizen. But we have a head of the Lok Sabha Parliamentary Committee, Mr. Balu, and Mr. Siva of the Rajya Sabha. They've already signed on to a statement. So that is the party's and the leader's position. I support that. Just out of personal curiosity, I just wanted to check whether I had been also on the target list, being the IT wing head of the DMK. And so far in the slowly published list of numbers, mine has not appeared yet, though many of the journalists that I have interacted with, their numbers have come in the list. So I'm told there's now a software that you can use to verify if you've been infected or not, and I ran the software a few days ago, and at least so far my phones seem free from infection. So I think that's true. I don't know, but anyway, I don't feel like I've done or said anything that should give me great cause for concern.
My last question to you right now is, with the budget coming, there also the government, we know from whatever we've reported, is preparing for a potential third wave. How much will that be factored into the budget, and how much of an impact has it had on the economy actually moreover?
I think the risks of a third wave, I would say, are substantially smaller than the second wave because of this antibody surveys and stuff that I told you about. I think also the economic consequences will be lower still than the second wave, even if the magnitude is almost the same, because we have better infrastructure, better learning, better capability of dealing with it. Of course, one could argue that a proper vaccination strategy by the union government taken at the right time would have made all these questions unnecessary, but we are where we are. I think the longer term question is not just about the second wave or the third wave, but how are you going to deal with the medium and long term fallout of the COVID kind of 2-year experience. We are seeing so much data that gives us great cause for concern, especially a state like Tamil Nadu, where we had almost zero maternal mortality, where we had almost every child in school of both boys and girls. Our data suggests that many of those things have started to deteriorate. So this is not something that you can fix in a day or a week. Of course, there will be economic consequences of businesses that have gone, permanently closed, mostly MSMEs. There will be other consequences, but the data suggests that, and this is not a Tamil Nadu only problem, this is across the country problem, that many of the dropouts from school may become permanent, that some may become child labor, that many women who we used to encourage to continue, and Tamil Nadu has more than 50% college enrollment is women, so that was one of the things we took great pride in, that is changing, and that many girls are getting married much younger, and even the risk of illegal underage marriages is increasing. So these kinds of things we'll have to worry about, and the biggest scale problem is that even for those who are not subject to all these things, let's say that they are still in a family, they had enough to eat, the government provided basic support, and now they're ready to go back to school. The lack of 2 years of classroom teaching effectively, or 1.5 years of classroom teaching, is immeasurable. The consequences of that is immeasurable. And I think that is really where we want to focus our efforts, and the Chief Minister has got it on top of his mind, that by the time we come for the 2022 budget or 22-23 budget in February, that we should allocate the appropriate funds for this kind of recovery post-COVID. We can't do much of it now because we can't bring them all back together. We're still stuck. We're still in the midst of the crisis. But once the crisis is over and we can go back to relatively normal, maybe we'll never go back to the old normal ever again. But once we get back to relatively normal, we need to be able to fund a lot of these efforts. And they're not going to be trivial. In fact, some analysis suggests even the teachers may need retraining. So I think we are thinking long term about that, because at the end of the day, it is the human resources of a place that really kind of dictate all the other outcomes. The administration can improve the systems, the data, the sensitivity, the thoughtfulness, the application of mind, all these things will improve governance. But the core value is the quality of the human resources. And that, the good news is that you can't lose relative advantage in 2 years that you have built over a century, right? It was the Justice Party government of 1921 that first introduced compulsory elementary education for boys and girls, and in a century ago. And so that long-term advantage of trying to bring everybody into the system and provide the lift to the bottom of the pyramid, that is a sustainable advantage. It's not something we lose in 2 years, because everybody around the country, around the world has suffered this. But that doesn't give us any great comfort, right? Our job is to worry about our people. I'm not worried about that I'm not as badly off as somebody else. Even if I'm thankful for that, I still got to work on improving this. So I think that will be really the focus of next year's budget. The routine things about improving the quality of our revenues and the volume of our revenues, improving the quality of our spending and the focusedness of our subsidies, the discrimination of who's who and what's what. Those are things that we will continue to do every year better than the year before. But we need to have a special focus next year on this aspect of COVID recovery, post-COVID recovery, if you will.
Thank you so much, sir. That was Mr. Thiagarajan. For more, stay tuned to ThePrint.in. This is Revati Krishnan with Manisha Mandal reporting from Chennai.